Stepping back into the limelight, it is the first direct upgrade of the iconic KLN line, sporting an alternative take on its Medachange mode specializing in collateral damage. It is KLN01C, Unitris C, with a kit of Heater PC, Rifle C, Gatling C, biped legs, and the leg ability of Supporter, which buffs all leg stats, minus armor and heavy limit, for every plant placed by the user on the field. Now, it was kind of expected at the tail end of the Damashi collaboration that we may or may not see crafty modes of two other iconic models that did receive that treatment. And, most certainly of no expectations, Unitris and of course X-Size, who got it same week at time of recording, are most certainly no exception. Unitris, however, specializing in that all-range and relatively well-rounded shooter-type design, doesn't really bring a whole lot of new stuff to the table, but already makes what he was already good at even better. Heater PC, or for short, Heater Plant C, is a relatively new setup skill that, upon activation, is basically just regular Heater Plant, which, upon being placed on the field, will boost the heat stat of all allies on the field as long as it's triggered a certain percentage higher. But this specialized version will give an extra 5% boost on top of the usual bonus that you will get from Heater Plant. Now, it is also worth noting that 5% at first glance may not seem like a whole lot. You guys are probably going to be looking at me going, but Kura, 5% really isn't a whole lot, so why is that significant? And you're mostly right, it doesn't look significant at first, but the key is that it's a percentage, not a flat bonus. So say for instance, if you have 100 points in something, 5% of that is an extra 5 points on top of that. So the higher the base stat, the higher the bonus that you're given from that is what I'm trying to tell you. And something to keep in mind. So if you have a moderately high heat stat in, say, the 1000s, you're going to be getting at least 50 more to that on top of what you'd be getting from the Heater Plant anyway. Rifle C on the right arm is a relatively new shooting skill that we first saw on Saikachi C, who was the first model to get the crafty mode. Long story short, it's basically just a post-tune-up rifle, but with a 30% damage bonus on piercing. So it's going to hit notably harder than your standard rifle, and you get a little bit more of a damage bonus to celebrate and basically reward you for breaking multiple parts at once with some extra damage. And that 30% will stack up pretty quick if you're breaking a whole bunch of parts at once. So even though Unitris was one of the models that had one of the highest base powers on a basic rifle that was heavy, Unitris basically takes that a step further with his new upgrade. Gatling C on the right arm is another relatively new yet conventional shooting skill, which is basically just regular Gatling, which is a scatter type attack, damaging one part normally and two others randomly for extra damage, but it also has an extra 50% to the crit rate. So something about Gatling and scatter attacks in particular is that they always were known for having an innately higher chance at critting on parts or on targets more than the standard attack. So this is more likely that even if your damage is going to be scattered, it's still going to be moderately painful across the board when Unitris does end up landing that lucky 50-50. Biped legs means that Unitris will have relatively solid coverage on most terrains and relatively well-rounded coverage at that. And compared to the original model, this version of Unitris is actually just a little bit better overall for extended support and survivability. Even though the upgrades aren't necessarily needed in comparison to his base mode and what he brings to the table, there's still very nice bonuses to have. With a base mobility of 913, he's already off to a very good start when it comes to the speed department, and pretty much starting with a good amount of momentum right out of the gate before any other bonuses come to assist him. An evade of 1053 isn't too shabby either, as it means he can dodge your grades relatively decently, depending on if he feels like it that particular moment. A melee resist of 965 isn't too terrible. The closer you can stay to that 1000, the better you have kind of that base cutoff for your damage reduction. But a shoot resist at 1583 does make up for that moderately well, and more or less par for the course with how a lot of shooters tend to be. When it comes to armor, he's packing about 4319 for the head, about 3959, almost 4000 per part, and legs at 3379, 4379 also means he's got some really healthy armor across the board as well. So even if he does end up taking a bullet or two or a slice or two, it's going to be a little tough to cut this guy down because he's got some pretty nice bulk working in favor. And the ability of Supporter does kind of tie into Heater PC just a little bit better, as it means every time he has to go set Heater PC or even reinforce it, his leg stats are going to get notably faster, more dodgy, and just a little bit better at the damage reduction all around every time he goes to place it. Now, for those that recall, the original Unitris model was capable of Medachange, so too is this specialized version. But instead of transforming into a wheel-type multi-ped with a mastery in super long range, this crafty mode instead kind of tones things down and focuses more on collateral damage and spread damage, with a kit of MedaRose, Power Napalm, Giga Gatling, multi-legs, and the leg ability of Assault, which adds a percentage of the legs shoot and melee resist cumulatively when using a scatter-type skill as bonus damage. Now, even though shooting skills like Giga Gatling were kind of carryovers from the original commercial model of Unitris as well, this extra kit between MedaRose and Power Napalm makes it very clear that Unitris is kind of trading a little bit of his extra power for the ability to spread a lot of painful damage over a lot of parts quickly, which means he himself might not be really good at breaking things, but he's going to make it incredibly easy for whoever comes behind him to do so. MedaRose on Drive A is a special skill and a new skill that basically is a gunpowder skill that ignores defense and also inflicts fire and wave at the same time on the enemy. So basically, upon attacking the foe, it will basically inflict them with a damage over time and a slowed effect on their heating pool, making it much easier for people to outrun the enemy once they're afflicted with this, and a lot easier to break them down as their armor is quite literally melting off their bodies. Drive B of Power Napalm is another gunpowder skill that we've started seeing relatively consistently, but it's basically just regular napalm, which is a scattered gunpowder type skill. Damage one part normally, two others randomly, but this one also gets a times 1.5 damage bonus as long as the user's legs remain intact. Or, in the case of Unitris MC, as long as he stays alive, he gets that bonus. At the cost, he cannot dodge or defend while in cooldown. Drive C of Giga Gatling also plays in the same vein of scatter attacks, but this one instead gets a times 1.5 damage bonus as long as Unitris remains alive, and he also gets defense ignore on top of that, so he's already going to be ignoring enemy damage reduction when he goes to shoot you anyway. At the cost, much like with Power Napalm, he cannot dodge or defend in cooldown, so he is going to be playing a relatively dangerous game when he does shift into crafty mode. But as long as you can keep him covered, he can basically make it rain on the enemies as freely as he pleases. And the leg ability of Assault does make it so that he gets extra power pumped from his resist stats every time he uses any of his drives, which, would you look at that, MedaRose, Power Napalm, and Giga Gatling are all scatter type skills. Multi-legs also means that he's going to be trading just a little bit of his overall stat spread for better coverage across most terrains, but that isn't necessarily the case with Unitris. While his melee resist and his evade do go down notably to 775 and 823 respectively, he does actually pump up his shoot resist to over 1600 and his mobility to over 1000 in trade of this. So it is kind of a fair trade-off there, again, as long as you can be covered and protected. All this being said though, as a pure set score, I honestly have to rate Unitris C a pretty well-rounded 7.5 out of 10. Much like the original Unitris model as well, this version with the crafty mode is actually still pretty well-rounded and a synergetic model unto itself. Basic rifle and basic Gatling with no real drawback or weakness on cooldown penalty with those extra bonuses does make for a very user-friendly model you can use almost immediately out of the box. And the Heater Plant, C, and Supporter in his base mode do synergize incredibly well together to make him go faster, dodge easier, and reduce damage just a little bit easier every time he goes to read. And specializing in the scatter damage does make it to the point where if you need to switch out your balance for something more aggressive, even at the cost of being scatter with the very harsh cooldown penalties, Unitris C does make that an option to you. As mixed parts, I do have to rate him just a little bit lower at a 7 out of 10 in this same regard. While even though you aren't missing on a whole lot with MedaRose, Power Napalm, or Giga Gatling with Assault, it is still a very synergetic model that if you're going to use any piece of Unitris, it's going to just be easier on you to use all of them at once. But if you do feel the need to spread the parts out across multiple bots on your team, again, basic rifle with an extra bonus, basic Gatling with an extra bonus, Eater Plant C and Supporter do synergize incredibly well together, so you have a lot of options to flex as well, depending on how you want to build your team.